It reminds me of what Steve Jobs said, right? Steve Jobs said that, like, we're just people, but we have the abilities to shift and alter our realities, right? But I think it comes down to, your level of commitment and expertise. But Steve Jobs, even though he said that, created a company where it's like we're refining the detail to the detail to the detail to the detail, where we are experts. And we can shift the status quo. But no.
I think this was a great way to kick off the very first podcast of Justin and Chris.
This is the first collaboration of the Heavy Metal Money slash Road to Wealth series. So
Yeah.
let's count it in. Do we do like a count in? Would that help or no?
Uh,
We'll just keep going.
just keep going.
All right,
That's good.
all right. Well, for those single and dozens of listeners listening in, I have Chris from Heavy Metal Money, and we're just here talking about development, but mostly about how we fail better. And Chris, why don't you came up with this idea, and why don't you kind of give an intro of not only yourself but kind of the topic at hand of where this podcast is going to go.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, man. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you. I think it's great that you and I we continually we talk off and on, and it just seemed to fit perfectly. Really, it's talking about how we need to not be afraid to fail if we intend to grow. And I think that was one of the big things that you and I were talking about a couple weeks back. And I think there is so many of us that are afraid to take that next step and afraid to, start a podcast, afraid to, apply for that job, afraid to just so many things. And it's interesting, and it's actually pretty timely too. I know that um, Doc G, which has a brand new book coming out, um, taking stock.
Taking stock. Everyone reserve your
Yeah,
copy. Coming out this summer in August by Jordan Grumet. So a little
that's
plug
right.
for
Yep.
Doc G. But yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Well, he's been making the podcast circuit, promoting the book, and I listened to a handful, and it's really interesting because it does really align with when you get later on in life and when you're on your deathbed, let's say, what are those regrets? And so many of us, we are so afraid to fail, to take that next step, regardless of what it is. Sometimes it's, I didn't get a chance to um, you know learn guitar. I didn't get a chance to hike this trail. I didn't get a chance to do any of these things. And I think we need to, I guess, just make sure people understand that it's okay to fail as long as we learn, right? We're going to fail forward. I know you mentioned that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I really wanted to take these discussions is, tips, tricks, our philosophy of how to fail better and truly grow as people, both, personally, professionally. That's kind of where I want this to go.
No, I love the premise, Chris, because to you want what I had the opportunity to talk to Doc G, during his release and pre-release a book, and one thing that I will quote from his book is this piece, and I'm sure I think Jordan even credits it, but we are dying from the moment we are born.
Yeah, right.
And definitely encourage anyone listening to this to read his book, because he takes a different approach of financial independence and living life and earning a fulfilled life, but in the concept of him being a hospice doctor. And I think what you're saying, Chris, is time is the biggest asset that not only we can lose, but we're constantly, to use Jordan's term, dying So that opportunity cost of is essentially attributed to fear. Like we're afraid to, step in and do that budget or get, learn guitar as you mentioned, or, whatever it is, whatever goal we have, because we never take in mind the time that's limited to us.
Yeah,
What do you think
one
there?
thing that I did is I did a while back. I made myself a Memento Mori calendar, which basically is a calendar with basically it's you're checking off boxes for every week that you're alive, right? And I based that off of from when I was born to approximately when I will end. And I think I based that off of the life expectancy of both my mom and my dad, my grandma and grandpa, that type of thing. So if I live till, again, I had mine on like 89 years old. So I look at that calendar. I got it hanging in my dining room, like literally. And every Sunday, I put another X, right? Another week down. And so now I glance at that and I say, okay, I have basically half my life left. Okay. Like a little less than half my life. So it, in a way, it helps put it in perspective that, I have so much left to accomplish, I guess. But also it is kind of, I get a little anxious, right? A little anxious saying, oh my gosh, I have just this much time left to get this, and this done. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's whether or not I want to finish writing a book. I want my blog to be more successful. I want to excel in my day job, my W-2 job.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see my kids, have families of their own. I want to be the best granddad I can be. I mean, all these things. And yeah, I just want to make sure that, I don't know, I have time to do those things. I don't know, I guess I'm getting kind of off track here, but
No, no, I think it's all relevant, Chris, because there is an element that, as you mentioned, that perpetual calendar that you described. Did you feel as though your mortality just came into more realization for you? Like, oh my gosh, I have X amount of time, so I want to accomplish Y and Z.
yes. And then also, um, I guess I'm one that I also try to not live in fear, right? I know that, again, so many people are afraid to fail. They're afraid to take that step. Um, and I was talking with a friend just this past weekend, and again, we're having this discussion about kind of the next year, the next 5 years, and it was where I could see the hang up was, well, what if? So earlier in life, they had this a situation happen, and it kind of framed how they behave. And now it's been 20 years later, and they still live by this. Well, what if this happens again? What if?
Yeah.
And I think like that, those two words, what if? Yeah, to me, it's always like, yeah, but what if it doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you don't want to limit yourself. So I think that, to your point, yes, but also it's almost like I feel like I got to beat the clock because I have no idea if a semi truck slams into me next week. I have no idea if I get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer next month. I mean, there's all these things that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like it makes me want to, just work harder, work faster. And I don't want to, I guess, when people often say, right, you don't want to forget to live the life that you have
Yeah.
because you're always looking in the future. I don't know.
There's an element of everyone likes to play defense because they don't want to be able to, what's the Mike Tyson phrase? Everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face.
Yeah, that's right.
But to your point is just those that live in that fallacy of like, I'm gonna wait for X moment in order to do this, or I haven't built enough, credibility or experience in order to apply for that job, or I haven't saved enough to invest in a Roth IRA because I have XYZ. Like, I'm going to wait till I hit X milestone. But there's many people that just don't have the courage to step into it because they're afraid of not doing it correctly or not succeeding. There is this limiting belief that they'll place on themselves either due to perfectionism, comparison. They just don't have the courage to fail. And I think where Chris and I are, we want our listeners to leave this episode of like fail forward. Like, if you're going to fail, move forward while you're doing it. You learn from experience, you fail again, and you move forward. Many of the people that you may idolize or hold in high regard, they have probably failed in some capacity. I guess my question is, like, when you're in the downest parts of your life, like, what are different elements, Chris, that you leverage or utilize in order to either pick yourself back up or just put things in perspective for yourself?
Yeah, I think it is that where, you and I have talked a lot about, as I, started writing on Heavy Metal Money on the blog, and then I did in 2021 slowly launch the YouTube channel. And you and I talked for months before it happened, because I was basically suffering from, why would people listen to me about personal finance, right? Why would they listen to me about, ways that I save money or how my investment strategy? Why would people listen to me? But then it was also like, well, I want to do the podcast, or I want to do the YouTube channel when it's perfect, right? I want to make sure I have the best transitions. I want to set up my studio. I want to make sure the lighting is just perfect. I want to, like, all these things that I was creating excuses for myself, right? That were really, I just needed to do it. Yeah. And it does, I don't want to say, well, it does get easier. It does, right? I mean, seeing yourself, it goes the same like when you first started podcasting, right? I mean, you were the same way, right? When you first start doing it and you're editing and you're listening to your own voice and you're like, oh, it's horrible, right? It was, again, the same thing on the YouTube channel. And it was like, I couldn't stand doing it. I couldn't stand looking at myself. But yeah. You know what? You just start doing it. It's content. And now you're, 18 episodes in. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of, those things where I want to say it's not necessarily comparing, right? I know it's really hard to not compare yourself to others, but I think it's the inspiration of where it could go. Yeah. I think that's what it is. It's listening to the other people that we look up to, listening to other podcasts, listening to audiobooks, watching other YouTube content creators, and, basically being able to, be inspired by what they have created and want to do your own, right? I think that was really kind of the biggest, I don't want to say motivator, but the thing that made me, on those days where I didn't really want to do it, I did it anyway.
Yeah. We've talked a lot too, Chris, about either habits or, just routine of getting in the deep work of what you do. And sometimes you have I don't want to say a failure, but you have a moment of, kind of self-reflection, like, am I doing this right? Or, you get back into the rhythm of things. It does go back into the habits that it has to be a habit that's enjoyable, right? It has to be something that not only gives you some form of dopamine hit, but just some element of I'm progressing of some element of progress. And there will be a lot of turns, left, right, U-turns, and back and forth in order to get to your destination. But we've always talked about the journey as a reward, right? It's falling in love in the process of it. Was there a time, I mean, you mentioned the YouTube piece, but outside of money, were there times where you had an element of fear, and it almost prevented you from not doing it, but what convinced you otherwise?
Yeah, I think that it was, some of the biggest thing was when I started to first get into real estate investing. I think that it was very overwhelming to begin with, right? It was where you were, everyone kind of gets into that. I should say everyone, but like a lot of people get into that analysis paralysis type of situation. And it was where I did probably close to a year and a half, right? In 18 months or more of education, right? It was reading books, I mean, dozens of books. It was listening to podcasts. It was, talking with others that were, investing in real estate. Excuse me. It was talking with, I talked with a lender. I talked with a real estate agent. I went to, I'm based here in Minnesota. I went to, some meetup groups. Like there's Minnesota Investors Association. And I would go there just to at least be around those people and listen to questions they ask, listen to what they're talking about. It was really scary when you were going to make that very first offer on your first investment property. Like I remember feeling anxious, almost sick to your stomach, to where this is a contract, right? I mean, if I pull out, right, I'm going to lose this $5,000 in earnest money or whatever, right? So this is a real thing. And that's where, I was crippled by fear, but it was, again, I think it was just kind of really looking at the long-term goal, looking at where am I going to be in 10, 15, 20 years? And, going back in your mind and like kind of revisiting the books you've read, like, the ABCs of real estate investing, even back to like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where it almost kind of all started for me. I go back and you start to kind of repeat some of that stuff in my mind, saying, you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere. Yeah. And that was, I mean, again, we talk about failing. Man, did I have some real estate deals that I absolutely failed hard. And we can maybe go that in a separate episode. Yeah, but yes, I absolutely have ones that I learned lessons, big lessons.
Yeah, I was recently watching one of my favorite movies, Chris, is the movie Rounders with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
And for those that never watched the movie, it was, probably late 90s, early 2000s. It was about Matt Damon as a poker player. And one of the lines, and especially if you do play poker or gamble in that type of sport, is that many poker players they'll never remember their big wins at all, but they will viscerally remember every bad loss that they've incurred, because those feelings are a lot more potent. That even the highest of highs that you may experience, whether it be winning a tournament or winning a real estate deal, because Chris, how many properties are you managing right now?
11
properties.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure you remember in vivid detail a real estate deal that turned left, and you know every
Yes.
single aspect of that deal.
Yes, absolutely. That's interesting. Yeah, it was. I think, and it's interesting why our brain. I mean, is that just human nature, right? That we're always going to remember those versus, those lows, right? Those ones that went south quickly versus the ones that went awesome.
Yeah, I would agree. In a lot of ways, that's why, past relationships, like you probably remember your first breakup or some bad moment. And even though you probably remember, some of the joyous times, early on in your dating life, you'll always remember that first heartbreak, right? And I think that's just I don't want to call it trauma because I feel that's a little too intense, but I think that's why people are afraid to take risks, because they don't want to feel that negative potency again. They don't want to jump in and dive into the deep end and really commit themselves to the process or to a goal, because they either don't want to be hurt at the end or they don't want to look foolish. I'm wondering, just because especially in today's culture, right, Chris, between social media. I mean, you and I, as personalities with our own respective blogs and podcasts and content that we're putting out there, there's a little bit of comparison just because we want to be able to put the best content where we'll get the clicks and feedback. But there are times that I'll self admit that I am so foolish or scared or imposter syndrome, whatever adjective you want to throw, it prevents me from stepping forward. You know, curious your comments there, or things that you do on your side.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot less. I think that's why I'm not more consistent with social media. I think that I'm not as consistent as I should, um, because of the fear of, am I going to word that incorrectly? Am I going to, you know, I don't know, is this going to get enough likes? Is somebody going to share this? I'm so caught up and wound up into, is it, again, it's the fear. It's the fear of, you know, failure. You're going to fail with that interaction, which is silly because it's just a freaking tweet. Like, who cares? But in all honesty, like, some of those things, at least like on some of the platforms, right? Like Instagram Reels or TikTok, it can take one that can truly help, really elevate a profile or, yeah. So I think that, yes, when it comes to social media, I'm not as active as I should be because of the fear of failing and not being as I guess, to influence others like some of the others are. Like I said, there's so many great people out there that I follow and that I read their tweets and their stories, and it's just inspiring on what they've accomplished.
Yeah, it just shows, Chris, that we're all human. I think the difficulty is, like, sometimes we conflate a little too much of our aspirations of what we want. We want the result, and our perfectionism or our fear or just overall whatever limiting belief is put in front of us is preventing us from even taking that next step. And again, the theme from this episode is, how do we fail forward? How do we fail better? There is this element where, in order to find some fulfillment for your life and maintain some progress, it's very cliche to say, but we have to live our own life and not someone else's version of it.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, there are, and again, there's also times when, I've published a new article, shared it on my socials, and I ask for, engagement from followers. And there are times when I get zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start to question, okay, so am I not creating relevant content? Am I not publishing it timely? Is it my narrative? Do I need to write better? Do I need to, like, what's the trick? Like, what's the discipline I need to adopt to make engaging content? But then I'll also then post some that can get, dozens. So it's interesting. And I think when it comes to social and the fear, maybe that's why, again, I'm not as active as I should be, because knowing that sometimes you do, and you're wondering, are you sure I should be doing this? Like, is this what I should be spending my time doing? I don't know. I mean, there's definitely times of self-doubt for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say, like, hey, pity party for Chris. That's not what I'm saying. But yeah, it is. And yeah, I mean, how about you? I mean, do you, what are your thoughts on, I guess, like you said, you're only human, but are those times that fear has really held you back from making that next step?
100%. 100%. You know, there, for those that do support the podcast, you know, whether it be friends or family, you know, they're like, oh, you got to take it further. You got to, you know, promote it. You got to do YouTube. You got to do TikTok. You got to do this. And, you know, I have to allow myself to find that balance for myself and recognize the bandwidth and limitations. Because, you know, the podcast for me right now is, you know, it is 100% of my time, you know, of my time that I put my energy and effort. But I also question of like, if I start going in other avenues, I feel like I'm losing the not necessarily the passion, but the complete effort, right, to put into there. So there are 100% moments of fear, to try something new or to try a different format, or I mean, shit, Chris, like reaching out to a certain guest, right? And there's times where, you know, like I've had some amazing guests on this podcast, and, you know, I'll have side messages like, oh my God, I can't believe you got that person. And, you know, it's hard for me to realize it because it's just like, you know, I think there is an element of like that validates the growth. But there are times where I'm just like, well, you know, I almost discount it because it's like, oh, well, it didn't reach this level. Like I'll compare it to like, well, it's not a Dave Ramsey syndication. It's not a, you know,
Right.
a Money Guys syndication. You taught me a lot, Chris, about, you know, giving myself permission for things, right? Give yourself permission to just marinate and enjoy the process of things, and take a win as a win. And I feel, you know, in order for me to have some consolation is knowing that, you know, it's a great product of work. It's my work and I can stand by it. And I think, I need to remind myself of that because in the moment, absolutely, it's just like, oh, well, you know, it could have been better. And it's just like, you know, you put so much criticism on yourself that, you know, it's hard.
It is. It is. And I think that it's, you know, I think it's a combination of, you know, really kind of building up the motivation to do it and get past the fear. But it's also those, like you said, the followers, the friends, the family, the supporters that do lift you up and to really help you do your best, right? And so, while I need to be, you know, focused on, you know, I want to be better than myself last time, right? When it comes to comparing to others, right?
Right.
But also, it's, you know, it's also a little bit of like, I don't want to let people down, right? Like I want to make others proud, and maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it, but that's kind of what I feel like in the back of my mind now when I'm creating content, which is, I don't know.
Do you feel like you're constructing your own version of success through others?
Maybe a little. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. I was at dinner with my daughter tonight. She's 20.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I think she forgot who she was talking to for a minute because she was talking about how on her TikTok, her and all of her friends, right? They're talking about how what's wrong with society is literally what's wrong with society is all these middle-aged bald white guys with podcasts. And I said, what now? And she says, yeah, because like, what are you talking about? And why do people want to listen? And it was pretty funny. I don't know why that just came to my head, but
so I don't want to peel on that onion, you know, too much, Chris, but I guess one, how did you respond?
that's exactly what I said. What I said, are you hating on me right now? She goes, well, no, not you.
Not you.
But it was pretty good.
You know, but speaking of children, as a fellow
Yes.
father, you know, it's one thing I came with an epiphany, you know, regarding this whole fail better, fail forward. As a young parent, and you obviously experienced this, you know, with your children. when you have young kids or just children in general, if you're a teacher, if if you have kids, kids in your life, if you're an aunt or uncle and you see your nephews or nieces, they are unbridled and have no shame. They jump into anything and everything. Yet us as parents, we're like, oh no, don't do that, don't jump, don't go in the deep end. We put these boundaries. And I come to the epiphany that we do not, as adults, do not adopt the same curiosity as our children or as we were when we were younger.
100%.
Tell me
Yeah.
more about that. Like, tell me what you think of that.
I did this exercise. I did this exercise a while back. Uh, you may recall something similar where it was a work function and we were given some materials. We were given scotch tape, string, and a bunch of uncooked spaghetti. You know where I'm going with this? So we had to make a tower on the table as high as we could make with uncooked spaghetti, tape, and string. I think that's what we had, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But the interesting thing, so this exercise, what was interesting was that then looking at the psychological study of that exact same exercise, they had a group of executives, leaders, middle management, all these professionals doing this exercise, and then they had a group of kindergartners do the exercise. And it's the kids that could make these amazing structures because you know what? They weren't afraid to fail. They just did it. And if you compare, like if you put a hidden camera in the room and you're watching these adults, they're sitting there scratching their head, analyzing everything before they even try step one. I'm not saying never to plan. That's not what I'm saying. But in this particular case, I just think it's so crazy because they weren't afraid to fail. That's how they were able to succeed. I mean, they would try this and it would fall down. Then they would try this and they learned every single time it fell down. Oh, it's just brilliant. I love that exercise.
and it's funny that if you're listening to this and you're probably thinking about one activity or hobby or whatever you're trying to create, you're putting all this analysis paralysis and preventing you from taking that first step. Yet we have children that are unbridled and have the curiosity and the ability to fail, and they're like, oh, I'll just start over again. That's why the proverbial teaching your kid how to ride a bike and they're going to fall 9 times, but on that 10th time they'll figure it out. But those first 9 times they're determined to get it because they want to be able to ride. We have to reset ourselves to recognize that whatever our goal is, whatever the hobby or the maybe it's the courage to ask someone out, whatever it is, it's just like it's worth the try. But keep in mind, there's not going to be humiliation at the end of the day. It's just going to be go ahead.
I was gonna say the reason why, because you just mentioned that, dude, I did that. So this is again unfiltered, totally.
Yeah.
I closed on another property last week, and yeah, my 11th. Yep. And afterwards, so someone that works in the office, I've worked with her several times before, and this time again, she comes in and gets me settled, takes my license to make a photocopy, like all the stuff you typically do in a closing. And we're talking small chat, blah, 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 small talk, whatever. And then I leave the office after the closing and I'm like, you know what? I called the number and hit the number, went right to her desk. She picks up the phone and she was like, yeah, what can I do? What can I help you with? And I said, I was just actually going to ask if you wanted to get a cup of coffee with me later. And that was one of the first times, again, you're going to miss every shot you don't take.
So inquiring minds want to know: did you have a guest at your coffee with your
Uh,
coffee?
no, she said that she was flattered, but she's already seeing someone. So then it gets really awkward because you're like, now what do you say? It was like, well, I'll see you at the next closing. Click.
But you know, of course, you're a gentleman. You know, it's not something you press. But you're right. You wouldn't have known that, and you know, you were running off a lot of positive motivation and good progress going forward. So again, it's going back to this aspect of, you know, how do we, you know, fail better.
Mhm.
You're right. We miss all the shots we don't take. Yet there's several opportunities in life where we don't jump into what we want to do because of a limiting belief or some element that we're causing too much stress in our mind or in our psyche to not do something.
You think you have like a regret? I mean, I guess maybe not regret is the right word because sometimes you can have no regrets. But I mean, because your path of life led you to where you are today with your current family and your current job and all that stuff. And I think that all of the, you know, either missteps along the way have built the person that you are and the situation where you are. But can you think of a time or a place or a decision that was made that, I mean, it could have gone this way and then things would have turned out different?
Yeah, I wouldn't frame it as regret, but it's always the what if, right?
Hmm.
And you know, we recently, you know, Chris and I have been talking about, you know, relocation, and you know that there's always those what ifs. You know, there's, you know, a few places in mind that I was a different person 4 years ago, and you know that there was a recent relationship story that I'm going to share where talking about regret, and it was a husband and wife, and you know the husband was, you know, a stereotypical workaholic, built this lavish lifestyle for, you know, them and their family, but it came at a cost of not being there, and the wife held on to a lot of this resentment throughout a number of years, and the husband had to like really marinate and sit down and say, you're right, but you and it was something along the lines of, you can't hold on to the person I was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. I am a different person. Yes, I've evolved from that, but you know, you can't be judging the person I am now for that. Yes, I'm trying to improve, but you're getting mad at the wrong person. You're getting mad at the person 10 years ago. And I thought that was fairly profound because it just shows that, yes, they went through a lot of shit together, but you know, the circumstance of who you are today, you have to allow yourself to like navigate through that and then make your decisions from there. So to answer in a very long way of answering questions, I don't think I have any regrets per se, but there are some what ifs. I think everyone is us as humans, right? Should I have taken that job? Should I have dated that person? Should I have, you know, bought Dogecoin back in 2019? You know, whatever the circumstances are. But it just shows that, you know, these are the moments. It's either you do or you don't. I mean, how many people? I mean, jokingly, we've talked about GameStop and all the meme stocks, and you know, this is a money personal finance podcast. But I'm sure, you know, those listening are just like, "Oh, I should have made that investment. I should have bought that real estate property." But you can't live in the past,
Yeah.
and you know, I think there is this realization that opportunity is now, and you have to operate given the cards that you're dealt today.
Yep. No, I like that.